It's been a decade since America's word was law. When Washington spoke, the world listened, but that world is disappearing fast. India, a nation of 1.4 billion people and the world's biggest democracy, just looked America in the eye and said no, not with anger, not with drama, just no. And the reaction, pure fury from the West. But this isn't just about one country defying another. This is about the end of an era where one nation controlled everyone else's choices. Look, economic pressure is just another word for control. That's what most people miss. It's not about right or wrong. It's not about helping anyone. It's about power. For decades, America used its economic muscle like a club. Step out of line, get hit, trade with someone we don't like, face consequences, make a deal we don't approve of, watch your economy suffer. And for a long time that worked perfectly. After the Second World War, America was untouchable. Strongest military, biggest economy, most advanced technology. So when they said jump, countries asked how high they had to. The global financial system ran through American banks. International trade happened in American dollars. Even information flowed through American channels. They basically owned the operating system that ran the world. But here's what changed. That system is breaking down. It's like trying to use a flip phone in the age of smartphones. The world moved on, but the strategy didn't. You've got major economies now that don't need American approval to survive. Countries like India, China, Brazil building their own systems, new partnerships, different currencies, alternative trade routes. Every time America pulls out the economic punishment playbook, they push these nations to innovate faster. It's like trying to plug a hole in a boat while the whole hull is cracking. The water keeps finding new ways in. Now here's where India comes in. Washington had a plan. They expected India to play by the rules, buy energy from approved suppliers, avoid deals with countries America didn't like, follow the script that worked for 50 years. But India said something different. They said, this benefits our people, so we're doing it not as an insult, not as a challenge, just as a fact. That's not rebellion, that's independence. And there's a huge difference. The West still thinks economic pressure works like a magic wand. Wave it around and countries change their behavior. But the magic is gone. The wand is broken because the rest of the world has options now. They're building their own wands. And what you're seeing isn't countries going crazy. It's countries waking up. Nations are realizing they don't have to choose between their own interests and American approval. They can just choose their own interests. And every time the West threatens punishment, they lose a little more influence. It's like crying wolf. Eventually, people stop listening. India isn't trying to start a war. They're just refusing to be told what to do. That's massive, because when one big country breaks free from the system, others notice. That's how change happens. Not with explosions, but with quiet decisions that add up over time. So yeah, the economic pressure game is dead. It's outdated, clunky, and India just proved it doesn't work anymore. For the longest time, people saw India as the quiet giant, huge population, ancient culture, growing economy, but politically careful. The world expected India to sit politely in the corner, make money, avoid controversy, and never rock the boat. For decades, India played that role, not because they were weak, but because they were patient. Those days are over. Today's India isn't asking for permission. Under current leadership, there's been a complete mindset shift. And it's not about making enemies or causing trouble. It's about respect. India is saying, we're not here to serve your agenda. We're not your junior partner. We're not a piece in your game. We're a sovereign nation with our own priorities. This isn't anti-Western hatred. It's not some crusade against democracy. This is what maturity looks like in international relations. You don't live your life based on what your neighbors want. Neither should a billion-person democracy. You can see this everywhere now. India buys weapons from America and oil from Russia. They join military partnerships with Japan while doing business with China. They invest in Silicon Valley and build their own tech industry at home. They work with NASA and launch their own space missions. They're not picking sides, they're picking what works. That kind of independence makes old powers nervous. For decades, global politics was simple. You're either with us or against us. Pick a team and stick with it. But India is saying, no thanks, we're on our own team. We don't need to be managed. And that's hard for empires to accept when the colony becomes the competitor. But India isn't flexing just to show off. This is calculated strength, not random chaos. It's quiet power. No threats, no drama, just consistent action, defending territory, building infrastructure, growing the economy, expanding influence. That's what real strength looks like, not noise results. If the West thought they could pressure India into falling back in line, they were wrong. India doesn't need how to be heard anymore. Their actions speak louder than words. They don't follow scripts written in foreign capitals. They write their own. That's why this moment matters. When the quiet giant starts speaking clearly, the whole world pays attention. The American president is furious. And honestly, it's not just about energy deals. It's about something much bigger. The collapse of American control over global decision-making. And India just proved it's happening faster than anyone expected. America operates on a simple idea. Pressure equals compliance. You apply economic force, people bend. You threaten consequences, countries back down. You show your strength, and the world falls in line. That's the playbook that worked for generations. And to be fair, it did work. America was the center of everything. If Washington wanted something, most countries delivered. Not out of love, but out of necessity. There was no other game in town. But the game changed, and America's leadership doesn't like what they see. When India refused to stop buying discounted energy, America saw it as betrayal. From their point of view, allies should obey orders. America invests in your economy, buys your products, gives you respect on the world stage, and in return, you do what they say. Simple transaction. But India didn't blink. They kept making deals that benefited Indian citizens. Even when Western media called it wrong, even when other governments threatened consequences, India kept trading. Why? Because it made sense for India. That's what sovereign countries do. They act in their own interests first. But to American leadership, that looked like defiance. So they hit back with what they know best. Trade penalties, higher tariffs on Indian goods, and hints of more punishment to come, financial pressure, diplomatic isolation, whatever it takes. It was a warning shot, a message that said, obey or suffer. But here's the problem. It didn't work. India didn't apologize. They didn't retreat. They stood firm, and that's why the fury is so intense, not because India disobeyed, but because American threats don't scare rising powers anymore. This is becoming a pattern. The tools that once gave America total control are getting dull. Trade wars, financial pressure, diplomatic threats, these weapons are losing their power, especially against countries like India that are economically strong, politically confident, and no longer desperate for American approval. The anger you're seeing is the emotional response to a bigger truth. The era of one superpower calling all the shots is ending. An American leadership which still sees power in black and white terms, winner versus loser, loyal versus rebellious, can't process that reality. India's rise isn't rebellion, it's evolution. A country that spent decades being careful is finally stepping into its full power. And the fact that they're doing it without asking permission first, that's what's driving Washington crazy. The real problem isn't with India. The real problem is that the system that made America untouchable is fading, and India is just one of the first to walk away from the shadow. People talk about politics and alliances, but when it comes to survival, it's really about energy. That's the foundation of everything. You don't run a modern economy on good intentions, you run it on power, and India understands this better than most. India's energy partnership with Russia isn't some political statement against the West. It's a smart business decision based on one thing, national interest. You've got a country with 1.4 billion people, one of the fastest growing economies on the planet. Massive energy needs for manufacturing, transportation, and development. If you want to lift hundreds of millions out of poverty and compete globally, You need energy that's cheap, reliable, and secure. Now look at Russia cut off from Western markets because of sanctions. They need new customers, and they're offering huge discounts, sometimes 20 or 30% below market prices. That's not just a good deal. That's a strategic advantage for any country smart enough to take it. And India took it while Europe scrambled for expensive energy alternatives and dealt with inflation. India locked in oil at bargain prices quietly, efficiently. No drama, just good economics. That's not about supporting Russia. That's about supporting India. They're saying we'll buy from whoever gives us the best value. Period. And that's exactly what a strong country should do. But the West doesn't see it that way. They wanted complete isolation of Russia, total economic cutoff. They assumed global pressure would force everyone to comply. But countries like India saw through that strategy. They understood that cutting off major suppliers hurts buyers too, not just sellers. So India refused to play that game. They paid in their own currency and Russia's currency. They bypassed dollar-dominated systems and negotiated directly. That's innovation. That's independence. And yeah, that's also a threat to Western financial dominance, because if India can buy energy outside the dollar system and do it successfully, then others can follow. And that's the real fear in Washington. It's not about the oil, it's about the president. What India is building is a new model, one where smart economics beats political pressure, where national interest trumps foreign approval, where energy is treated as a tool for growth, not a weapon for control. This is what real strategy looks like. It's not about loyalty to foreign powers. It's about long-term thinking for your own people. India isn't picking sides in someone else's conflict. They're picking a path for their own future. And that future runs on affordable energy, smart partnerships, and economic security, not lectures from across the ocean. The fundamental mistake Washington made wasn't about oil prices or trade deals. It was about psychology. They assumed India would cave under pressure, that they'd act like a subordinate in a system designed by and for Western powers. That assumption, that outdated 20th century thinking, is crashing in real time. For decades, American foreign policy worked through influence, economic influence, military influence, cultural influence. Washington got so used to setting global rules that they forgot to check if anyone still wanted to play by them. They believed countries like India would always need approval, that they trade independence for access, sovereignty for investment, autonomy for inclusion in Western systems. But India isn't interested in being managed anymore. This isn't the 1990s. India isn't struggling to find its place. It has a place. It earned it. Fifth largest economy on Earth, soon to be third largest democracy in history. Nuclear power, space power, technology power. They don't need a seat at someone else's table. They're building their own table. And Washington missed that completely. They thought the threat of economic punishment would scare India away from independent decision-making. They thought diplomatic pressure and media criticism would force compliance. But all that did was show Hall. Little America understands the new India. India didn't panic. They didn't lash out. They didn't even respond emotionally. They just kept moving forward quietly, confidently, precisely because this isn't about confrontation. It's about conviction. India's leadership made it crystal clear national interest comes first always, and that means deciding who to trade with, who to partner with, and how to handle global politics without needing anyone's permission. Here's where the miscalculation gets even bigger. Washington assumed their influence would last forever, that economic dominance was permanent. But in a world with multiple centers of power, no single country holds that kind of leverage anymore. Trade patterns can shift, partnerships can evolve, technology can spread power faster than any government can control it. And India understands they're playing the long game. This isn't rebellion, it's evolution. When America reacts with threats and punishment instead of respect and dialogue, they show their own insecurity. They reveal that they still think power works top-down, one direction only. But India doesn't operate that way. They don't need to overthrow the West. They just need to stand up for themselves. And that's exactly what they're doing. So yes, Washington miscalculated badly. They expected obedience and got independence. They wanted control and got competition. And the harder they push, the more they prove how much the world has already changed. India isn't stepping out of line. They're stepping into their own power. And the real question now isn't whether India will comply. It's whether the West can adapt to a world where they don't give all the orders. Most people still don't get how much India has changed. That's the biggest mistake. They're thinking about old India, the developing country, the outsourcing destination, the place where labor was cheap. But that picture is completely wrong now. What we're seeing isn't India rising, it's India already risen quietly, strategically, systematically. India is the 5th largest economy in the world. Soon it'll be 3rd behind only America and China. But the number matters less than the trajectory. India is accelerating, powered by infrastructure, innovation, and internal confidence. Look at the data. Over 7% economic growth year after year. Population with a median age around 28. More than 800 million internet users. One of the biggest consumer markets on the planet. And now with artificial intelligence, semiconductors, renewable energy, and space technology, India is moving from consumer to creator, from being the back office to being the brain center. And here's the key difference. India isn't copying anyone. They're not trying to become the next America or the next China. They're building something uniquely their own, democratic, decentralized, rooted in their own cultural identity. That's what makes it so powerful. You can't compete with authenticity. You can't outscale a billion minds that believe in their own future. Politically, India has mastered the art of strategic balance. They maintain relationships with Russia, Cooper, aid with America, trade with Europe, work with the Middle East, and still build their own capabilities at home. That's not confusion, that's sophistication. That's the kind of quiet power most Western analysts don't know how to measure. And the West is starting to notice, some with admiration, others with concern. Because when you have a country that's not only growing fast but also refusing to be controlled, that changes everything. It's not hostile, just independent, but in a world used to dependency, independence looks like defiance. India doesn't want to dominate the world. That's what makes them different. They just want to be left alone to lead themselves, to build, to grow, to innovate on their own terms. And that's a revolutionary idea in a system built on influence, intervention, and control. The real measure of power isn't how loud you are, it's how much weight your silence carries. And India's silence lately has been deafening. They don't respond to every criticism. They don't justify every decision. They just act and let the results speak. And the results are speaking volumes. India is landing spacecraft on the moon. They're building the world's largest digital infrastructure. They're exporting vaccines, software, satellites, and clean energy. They're feeding over 1 billion people and educating hundreds of millions. This isn't potential anymore. This is performance. So when you say India is rising, they're already behind the curve. India isn't on the runway anymore. They're already in the air. For a long time, the world operated on one big illusion that one country, one currency, one system could run the entire planet. That illusion is dead. We're not moving toward a world with multiple power centers. We're already living in it. America isn't collapsing, let's be clear about that. But their monopoly on global influence is gone forever. And the sooner world leaders accept this reality, the better prepared they'll be for what comes next. Because what we're witnessing is a complete rebalancing of global power, not based on ideology or military alliances, but on capability, independence, and strategic value. And India isn't just part of that shift. They're leading it. You've got America, still powerful, still innovative, but more internally divided than ever. You've got China, fast and organized, but increasingly distrusted globally. Then you have India, the world's largest democracy, young, dynamic, and not tied to anyone's playbook. This makes the current moment historically significant. We're not just seeing new partnerships, we're witnessing the birth of new centers of gravity, new orbits of influence. India's approach to Russia, on energy to America, on technology to the Middle East, on trade to the developing world, world on diplomacy. That's not contradiction. That's the blueprint for post-unipolar politics. Old powers demanded loyalty. You're either with us or against us. That binary thinking doesn't work anymore. Not in a world where energy, information, and innovation are decentralized. Not in a world where artificial intelligence and quantum computing are about to rewrite everything from warfare to finance to medicine. India gets this. That's why they don't sign on to every Western narrative. That's why they buy discounted energy when it helps their people. That's why they build technology at home while partnering globally. That's why they sit at tables with both Washington and Moscow. Because power in the new world isn't about domination. It's about options. The more choices you have, the more leverage you hold. And India has options, not just in foreign policy, but in manufacturing, energy, defense, space technology. They can pivot, they can partner, and most importantly, they can say no. In diplomacy, that's the ultimate form of strength. The West still sees the world through an outdated lens: enemies, allies, deterrence, punishment. But India is looking decades ahead towards self-sufficiency, strategic flexibility, technological sovereignty, and that's the future. Think about the internet. It didn't grow because one server controlled everything. It scaled because it became distributed. Nodes everywhere, constantly adapting, sharing, evolving. The same thing is happening geopolitically now. Countries are becoming nodes of power, influence, and development. That's how we future-proof the world. Yeah, the old powers are nervous. When power multiplies, control fades. You can't predict every outcome anymore. You can't write all the rules unilaterally. But here's the truth. That's progress. That's how real global cooperation begins, when no single player gets to decide everything. When we move from dominance to dialogue, from monopoly to multiparity, this is where real leadership matters. Not by trying to drag countries back into outdated systems or punishing them for independence, but by designing frameworks that allow many powers to thrive simultaneously. We need new institutions, new approaches, new thinking. We need diplomacy that's modular, partnerships that are dynamic, alliances that are flexible. Above all, we need to recognize that the future is not a chessboard, it's a network. And in a worked world, everyone matters. Not because they're powerful, but because they're connected. That's the world we're building now. It's complex, it's chaotic, but it's also incredibly exciting. The uniolar dream is over. The multipolar reality is here. And India isn't just part of that new world. They're helping lead it. You know, history has these moments where the power lines shift, where the center of gravity moves and the world doesn't notice right away, but it happens quietly, irreversibly. This is one of those moments. India isn't just making moves, they're making a statement, not in words, not in headlines, but in choices. Smart, bold, unapologetic choices. They're buying energy on their own terms, building technology on their own soil, forging partnerships that serve their own future, not someone else's past. And they're doing it without needing permission from Washington, Brussels, or Beijing. This isn't about being anti-West or pro-Russia or anything in between. This is about being pro-India, and that idea that a nation can rise without aligning, without begging, without playing by inherited rules. That idea is the future. The world isn't uniolar anymore. It's not even bipolar. It's becoming multi-vector, decentralized, distributed, and dynamic. And India is one of the architects of that future. The West can get angry. They can issue warnings. They can throw around sanctions and threats. But here's the truth. Washington hasn't fully accepted yet. The era of control is over. You can't bully 1.4 billion people into submission. You can't tariff away sovereignty. You can't sanction independence out of existence. India is playing the long game. They're not reacting emotionally. They're calculating, building, thinking generationally, not just politically. And that's what real power looks like now. It's not about dominance. It's about resilience. It's not about obedience. It's about self-mastery. It's not about fear. It's about vision. India has that vision, and they're no longer afraid to act on it. So yeah, American leadership might be furious. The West might be frustrated. But India is just getting started.